to now process the very things that you've mentioned, which are mortgages, equity, all of these things, right? And so I think what I'm excited by is having all of these great panelists that Michael already introduced. Is this is something that despite the four very different backgrounds of our panelists here, is that all of us, all of you all have asked, is my algorithm biased at some point? Or you've asked us about the products that you are supporting or analyzing. And has anyone ever asked us about the products you're looking at in the audience? Is this algorithm biased, or is this thing that I'm doing biased? I see a few share of hands up. This is great. So if you haven't yet, I can promise you by the end of this panel, you will have. And the kind of, we were talking backstage, and we're like, you know what, we're gonna be a bit decentralized about our panel. We're going to interrupt each other. It's like as if we've known each other for 10 years, and we're gonna have an amazing conversation based on what you just said, Marissa. So I wanna start off on actually going straight to asking everyone, what were your initial just thoughts running through your mind when you were hearing Marissa's talk? And then I'm going to jump to you, Erin, for a question. But I want a quick reaction first, because that was so much history that we usually are not exposed to, and that I would say our industry can sometimes be short-sighted about, right? Because we are building a newer and better financial system, and not just, and then maybe an entirely new one, but it's also important to know what are we building on top of. So I'm curious, what were you all thinking?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Marissa. That was an incredible presentation and such critical data. And thank you to everyone here for being interested in this topic. We're really grateful. It was just really phenomenal. I think what something that really stood out to me is I had never seen that Confederate dollar before. And it really sort of just hit home to me how sort of Black people have been the financial backbone of this country throughout its entire history. And it's really sort of clear, even in the Confederate South, that where our value lies. So that was really interesting. And I think you can hear all of that data and feel like, wow, this world is unfair, and it can sort of depress you and upset you, but actually it made me feel incredibly optimistic because it's very clear that Black people were very intentionally kept out, excluded from the financial systems, and yet we've come so far, even despite that exclusion. And I feel like we're right at the precipice of real, true financial inclusion within this country and around the world. And it makes me so excited to think about what will happen when Black people, for example, can get easier access to mortgages in a way that is fair. And I think blockchain presents a real opportunity in terms of the transparency to understand how those decisions are made. So it just makes me incredibly optimistic about the future.
Yeah, my initial reaction, again, great presentation. A lot of the statistics I've seen before, but just a reminder, the legacy financial system is terrible. And what we've seen so far is that it doesn't work. The equity between people is always skewed. And the first thing I thought when you put the information up there was that, I wonder how many people have seen this before. Because honestly, they don't teach financials in school, and they don't really give a solution to the problems we've already had. So I'm just glad to be in a space where, like you said, Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto space, we can actually have a chance. And the financial system, we don't owe them anything, the legacy system, and it gives us a chance long term to build the generational wealth that we need. So great presentation again. And my initial reaction is, man, I was right.
And I was like, please don't stop. Just keep talking. Show us more of this history.
Yeah, pretty shitty system. We gotta change that.
Yeah. So. Amazing. Don, what did you think?
Great. Yeah, thanks. So I was going to say it's really fantastic work. Thank you so much for putting all this together. That's amazing. And you're right, the statistics really speaks for itself. And when I was looking at this, I was really thinking, wow. Yes, so much we need to do, and I'm really glad that being a technologist, really we need technology to help solve the problems. So I'm really happy to be here that we can actually provide technical solutions, advancing the technology further to really help with the cause and help make the changes. And on the panel we'll also talk a little more about, for example, what OASIS does and so on. So I'm really glad that we are really building the technology to help advance the state here.
Yeah, so before we get super technical, because Don is the founder of OASIS Protocol, who's doing incredible things around privacy and actually solving for decentralization and scalability at the same time. I actually want to jump to Erin to a question I had in my mind, because when I just thought it was so incredible, Marissa, that you talked about the history of the New Deal, because in the history books in the US, what we learn about the New Deal, and we tell the whole world, is that America, we came up with a solution for depression. We came up with this New Deal, and we came up with all this capital, and then Americans benefited from it. And that was when and our economy and our history has continued to just be such an exemplary example of how do you deal with dips, right? And what I thought was great was that you actually said, you know what, the New Deal didn't benefit everyone, that it was the greatest wealth transfer, but for some people. And some people were able to benefit from it. And in that, if you don't understand the history of the 1930s, then you don't understand what's happening now. So Erin, how, as the VP of Digital Customer Experience of the first Black-owned bank and also the largest digital Black-owned bank, how are you as a bank serving Black communities, the very communities that Nurse is saying who did not benefit from the New Deal? What are you doing differently as a bank? This is not even about crypto yet. I just want to first ask, what is happening here at the bank?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, first of all, I appreciate everyone here for not booing me off the stage because I know people in crypto, they hate banks, right? So I get it.
This bank is different though. We're going to get there.
So at One United, we are the largest Black-owned bank in the country, and our mission is to close the racial wealth gap. So everything that we do is really focused around enabling Black families to build generational wealth. Right, so just having that as our mission, and our mission to not be how can we raise revenue and give back as much money to our investors as possible, that's not our aim and that's not our focus. And we consistently put out services that we believe it's not always about how much money can we bring in, but often about what can we do to serve our community. There's a variety of different ways that we do that. Something that Marissa talked about a lot about is about where, how physical location impacts your financial experience. At One United, we have branches and offices in some communities that traditional banks would never have touched. In Crenshaw, in Compton, in areas within Boston and Miami that there were no financial institutions that they didn't want to touch. Now we're a digital bank, so physical location isn't as important to us anymore. But when it comes to our services, we're constantly looking at how can we help people to build. So that may be about second chance checking accounts for people who don't have the credit in order to get a traditional checking account. It's about, we offer a service that gives personal loans without a credit check, but instead just based on your relationship with One United. So it's about giving people an opportunity and a chance.
Well, and another thing I learned is you also do, you also front checks, right? So people don't have to go to a check cashing place. This is one of the most exploitive forms of financial institutions in the U.S.
Yes, absolutely.
You're doing so much. And so I'm curious, Izzy, you your whole life's work, you switched from being an instructor of computer engineering and you were teaching this. And how did you, now your life's work is all about promoting generational wealth through Bitcoin. What do you think when you hear from someone like One United, like Erin in her position? What comes to your mind when you go, okay, could this be a different way of accumulating generational wealth? And how does that comport with what you're trying to help everyone understand?
So the main thing is opportunity, equal opportunity, not necessarily equal outcome. And I think that in the Bitcoin community, crypto community, you have access to new jobs, new positions, new startups, new capital that you can actually use. And I think that the only thing the Black community has needed is a chance. Now that we have that, not asking for any handouts. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and all the free shit we got, you gotta pay for it now. So honestly, that didn't work out. But if you have the opportunity, I think that, and what I've worked on for the last 10 years is in Bitcoin and anything else. If you have the opportunity, if you have the access, you have the network, you can actually achieve. And every community is affected by the legacy financial system, as well as inflation right now. Shit, we all broke actually. I mean, it's almost 9% in inflation. So not just Black community, but every community that wants to use it and have a circular economy, it's possible. And that's all we needed for years.
Well, one thing that Michael Casey has talked a lot about, who's the host of Consensus and also the Chief Content Officer of Cointest, is he, is really questioning that, do we have enough diversity in the space, right? Because if we don't have the base coin holders and also token holders who are diverse, and it's not, if it's just still too concentrated, right, then we actually still don't have a very diverse ecosystem. And so is it possible, because did the Black community or Latino community or immigrant community, is it too late to get into Bitcoin? Are the earliest holders still the same people who benefited from the New Deal in the history that Nurse has been talking about, which is primarily white males? Or are you saying that there's a chance with all the work that you're doing?
Oh yeah, well, two things there. First, it's very hard to identify the wallets, who owns the wallet. So, but we have seen with media's help that, hey, this is the Bros Club again. This is, just for white males, when in reality, actually, the Black community is the most likely to use crypto as far as demographics. So that hasn't been told in media, so people don't understand that. I do think we have enough diversity. The problem is, do people understand that it is diverse and that it is possible?
Yeah.
That's why we're here talking about it now.
Why are Black communities so into Bitcoin? Why is it that in the context of what was just been discussed, why are they more trusting of this kind of currency over a fiat, which is government central bank controlled, given what we've just learned? Can you break it down for the audience a bit?
Yes, absolutely. So from what I've seen early on, not very trusting because of, again, the media is a Ponzi scheme, it was rat poison for some people, it's terrible. But what I've seen over the years is that if you take a concept like crypto and you show it to Black people, just seeing it, and they're like, this is the opposite of what we've been going through, I'll at least give it a try. And I think when COVID hit in 2020, and a lot of people had time to sit home and actually study and look up and research the things that have been put out, that's when we saw a huge uptick, as well as in price, but also in user base. So I just think that the opportunity was there. So many amazing people in the space were able to jump into the market, and then here we are now building.
So it's about education.
I'd love to answer that question as well. I think the Black community has always been very early adopters of technology. It's not just limited to crypto, so it's not surprising that we would be excited to get into this space. And you asked, okay, but is it too late? And I think at One United, we focus a lot around enabling and onboarding people into crypto. So we do a lot of crypto financial literacy training. And even the most, what I consider to be the most usable crypto applications, people really struggle to use. I do digital customer experience. That's all about how usable is your piece of technology. And crypto is still at the very early stages. It's hard to understand how to utilize a lot of the technology. So I think there's still a real opportunity to build really unique applications on top of crypto, and there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that everybody, not just the wonderful people in this room who are really engaged and want to study it and get degrees in it and so on, but just that the average person can understand how to buy and sell.
Could you just share with the audience one example where you make crypto accessible? Because you have so many examples where a bank is actually getting into crypto, but you're using culture and actually speaking to the creator economy. So can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think NFTs are really interesting to people. It's really exciting to be at the intersection of art, finance, and technology. And I think there's a lot of wonderful ways that that's being used. At One United, we worked with an incredible activist and artist named Adonis, who did a piece about Josephine Baker. It's this beautiful portrait that we helped him to turn into an NFT. And Josephine Baker, some people are familiar with different parts of her story, but she was the first international pop star in the world, way before Britney Spears, way before the Beatles, anybody else. She was an internationally known superstar, a Black woman. And she then, when World War II hit, she became a spy. she was literally given all of the medals of honor because she worked for the French resistance in order to help them to fight against the Nazis. And then after that incredible career and putting her life on the line after being this international pop star, she went back to the US and became a civil rights hero. That's an example of how crypto can be used to tell these incredibly important stories and to inspire the next generation, while also enabling people. It's a great access point for them to say, hey, I want this wonderful piece of art, so I'm going to learn how to set up a wallet. And once you've set up your wallet, then there's so much more that you can do within the crypto space.
So you're doing all this stuff, the both of you, getting people involved in using products that are being built on various protocols, in particular Bitcoin, for example. And you're getting people into NFTs. I'm curious, John, when you hear this then, as someone who has designed the protocol, especially in the last few weeks, one of the data points that's come out with a problem in one of the algorithmic design of a protocol was in Terra. And that was the issue, that was a problem with an algorithm, with the way that Anchor was designed, and with the way yield was being held, and the way people were forced, to the terms of staking, right? And one of the stats that actually came out very recently in The Economist was that the group that was the hardest hit from the recent crash was actually Black Americans. And I actually don't think the study was comprehensive because it was just very focused on US. I think we would find that it was also many other groups like refugee groups and immigrant groups that also hurt around the world. But in particular data point was that Black Americans were the hardest hit from the most recent crash. And this is a problem with algorithmic design. And this is a problem with what the protocol, Terra, was pretty much advertising to getting people to invest in their point. And it seems, this is why I'm curious, as someone, you've talked a lot about responsible design of protocols, responsibility over data. And this is why you built out Oasis protocol to function in such a way. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts when you hear about what Isaiah and Aaron are talking about, and also Marissa's history? And now you have what happened with Terra. What's going through your mind, and how is Oasis protocol designed differently so they can be responsive to exactly these problems?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good question. That's why I was saying that I'm really excited to be here as a technologist. I mean, these are really important problems to solve, and we really need next generation technology to help solve these problems and make changes, really to change the world. So that's also how essentially the vision of Oasis came about, is that we want to build the platform, the next generation platform for Web3, and in particular to enable what we call building a responsible data economy. And also I think really that's the future of blockchain Web3 in general. So we started with blockchain in terms of use cases from DeFi, and NFT, GameFi, Metaverse, and I think really the next level is the data. It's a data economy. That's really the largest economy in the world, in society as well. And also this is where most of the problems are. So the examples that we talked about for this financial inclusion and getting mortgages at different rates, unfair rates, and so on. So all these is a part of data economy. And today we have a lot of problems in data economies, talking about fairness, talking about privacy, and all these. And in order to do that, in order to change how things are done today, that's actually where we need to develop the new next generation technology. In particular, that's what Oasis is doing, is Oasis is the first to combine blockchain and privacy computing to enable this platform of a responsible data economy.
Okay, but you have to stop there, because I can name enough, so many protocols, and there ones were we are also doing the same thing of the first and doing enabling privacy and also data. So can you break it down for the audience? How is Oasis different than all of these other protocols that are say the same words?
Okay, great. Yeah,
in simple language also, but you can combine both. But there's very technical people in the audience, and also people who are not as deep in the layers of the protocol.
Okay. So first we can start from Oasis' unique architectural design, and then we can talk about some of the unique capabilities and use cases that the Oasis supports. So in terms of the architectural design, Oasis has a unique architecture design, and it's the first to actually enable, we call this modern modular architecture, where we separate execution from consensus. So now, I think more people are talking about this, more protocols are talking about it, including ETH2DAO and so on, but actually Oasis is actually the first public blockchain that actually has this design of separating execution from consensus. So the Oasis architecture design actually has several layers. Has a separate consensus layer that only does consensus, and has a separate layer called the paradigm layer, stands for parallel runtime, and that's the execution layer. And also, so in this case, some people may have heard about rollup, layer 2, which is a scaling solution for layer 1 protocols. So each paradigm in Oasis is a parallel runtime. It's an isolated execution environment or runtime environment. You can run multiple of these paradigms in parallel, and then their security is all actually verified through the consensus layer using verifiable computing. So essentially, each paradigm on Oasis you can build as a native rollup on the consensus layer.
So by separating out the executional layer from the consensus layer, how does that actually make a difference in terms of detecting bias ahead of time, or improving security and improving privacy? How does that actually matter for the user or the use case at the end?
Right, that's a great question. So first of all, the Oasis consensus layer is pretty simple because it only does consensus. So already this way you can improve security by just keeping the consensus layer really simple. And also by having multiple this paradigm running at the execution layer, and then only have the consensus layer that's consensus. So this way we actually enable what we call fault isolation and also performance isolation. So for example, even with Ethereum, even with the newer improvements, you can, even if you have a rollup, but the main consensus can still get congested because you still have smart contracts running there, and they can still cause the chain to congest and raise gas fee and so on. Whereas with Oasis, because you have different paradigm running at the execution layer, and the consensus layer only does consensus. So then the congestion in one paradigm actually doesn't affect the congestion in another paradigm. So the whole chain actually can still function well and can still be really fast and cheap and so on. So that's why by this truly modern architecture, modular architecture design, and really truly separating execution from consensus, and doing this from the beginning with this native support, then you can provide the best security and performance isolation.
So before I jump to Marissa for just like now her reactions based on our conversation, is I'm just curious that in a practical, how would it actually make a difference? For how would it have prevented something like what Tara was designing? How does like the algorithm, the consensus mechanism, and what you're designing, how is it actually more responsible for the kind of use cases that we want to see more of for the blockchain, for Web3, that are going to require larger, more scaling, more onboarding? How does this actually make a difference for a fairer, more equitable, and safer blockchain deployment?
Right. So with this architecture design, that's also how we can. So each different paradigm, they can actually be very different. For example, we have EVM compatible paradigm called Emerald, and also you can have other paradigms. So one paradigm we call it a confidential paradigm, where the whole paradigm runs inside secure execution environments. So in this way, you can have like the confidential smart contracts, for example. So this is how we provide privacy computing, and that's how we natively combine blockchain and privacy computing. And now with this confidential paradigm, you can run different dApps, different applications on a blockchain in a purely privacy-preserving, secure, confidential way. So, and then on top of this, we build up a vertical stack, really enable what we call data sovereignty. So with this vertical stack, by combining blockchain and privacy computing, with the ledger, it helps essentially keep an immutable log of users' data rights. And then with privacy computing, it enables data consumers to utilize users' data, but at the same time to provide privacy protection and still allow users to take control of their data. And then with this vertical stack, that's how we also enable a truly scalable privacy-preserving platform to enable this responsible data economy.
I think what you just said is so key.
Well, so
Yes, jump in.
Well, I mean, plainly put, you're not going to rug pull like Dogecoin.
Sorry?
Exactly.
Well, let's say you're not going to rug pull your project like Dogecoin from Terra Luna.
I mean, so...
As long as we don't have that, that's perfect.
yeah.
She said a lot of black people lost money in Terra Luna, so I just want to make sure.
Wait, Isaiah, what did you say? I didn't
She's
hear.
not gonna do that.
Oh.
That's not the agenda.
So the project, so we are actually building
Wow.
up this...
Beautiful. That's all.
That's right. So I
just want to make sure people know.
I'm curious then, like, I think when you just brought that up is that it actually gets back to the importance of why I wanted to come back to America to have a reaction to this, because if essentially in the past it was like bodies were being used as collateral, right, for essentially like wealth accumulation, and now Web3 is all about data and having sovereign data. That actually is a new form of collateral, but for Web3 to properly work, we need to have as individuals ownership of our data so that we can have data sovereignty, which is what you're just talking about, which is what Isaiah, you were pushing on about. So I'm curious, then Marissa, what is your reaction? Because I really want to ask you, like, I hate when people are like, are you like pro Bitcoin or pro crypto or not? It's something, I'm not going to go there. But I really just want to know, like, how after giving this talk, like, what do you think about in terms of discussion of the possibility of blockchain-enabled technology to resolve and address some of the issues, the historical issues that are happening right now that you brought up?
So let me say one thing about discrimination. There's two different things that we often get mixed up together. I've been involved in a lot of policy, especially post subprime crisis. So the subprime crisis, 53% of black wealth was lost during the subprime crisis. It turned out that the banks went to those communities first and gave them the worst types of loans. So there's two things going on, and the policymakers in the remedy mixed those up. One is just like outright discrimination, right? Like Wells Fargo was like, we're gonna go to that neighborhood because that's where black and brown people are, and we're gonna give them those loans, and the yield spread premiums, they incentivize that. The other is like this systemic material condition. When you start out with such a drastic gap, those things self-perpetuate. So when you said there's a crash and Black communities are hit harder, it's not a conspiracy. That's always how it's going to be. When you have a virus, Black communities are going to get hit harder. When there's an environmental disaster, when there's a flood, when there's a storm, when there's a benefit, when there's a subsidy, anything, it's going to come. So I focus on that systemic topography. Look at the dollars, look at the capital. Where has it migrated and why? And how institutionally can that be fixed? So I think on this side, on the discrimination side, I think diversity, representation, and getting bias out of the algorithm is really important to just like not have like two equally positioned borrowers where you're discriminating against one and not the other, because that happens, right? Or like housing assessments, right? You go to a person's home and they have Black pictures, that's gonna come down like $150,000 less than a home with white pictures. That's just subconscious bias. So I think crypto, blockchain, fintech, anything that takes away those mental shortcuts that we have as like humans brought up in a racist sort of society, that's gonna help. The systemic one, I think we just have to be very careful about understanding what that comes from and how to fix that history, right? If you don't have houses and schools and ladders up, there's very little that any institution can do. But I think I will say on the legacy banks, they haven't been trying. So the fact that this group is trying, that's a bonus.
But I think this is why we need to have conversations like this, and I'm really grateful for how this has been curated, because it's very rare that we can have on stage such a diversity of also perspectives and experiences. And what's very clear that I think we all can agree on is that algorithms are a clear part of Web3. They have not gone away. They're at all layers, in particular the protocol layer. And if we don't actually understand what's happening at that layer, any kind of, you can continue to onboard and bring more people on to build products and to use products. But it goes back to if the underlying system, if you don't understand the mechanisms and the type of consensus mechanism that's being used, then we can end up in lots of unintended consequences. It's ultimately humans who design these protocols at all layers, whether in Web 2 and Web 3. And to wrap it up, I think it's just incredible that essentially, Aaron, I feel like we've had a very hopeful ending from you, which is that you do believe that Web 3 leaves, that we are on a precipice of something. We are on stage here, with such great representation in ways that never were possible before Web 2 or all of the hundreds of years prior to this. And Isaiah, I think what you said, which is so important, was that all you're saying is that not just Black communities, but every community that's been left out just needs a chance. And Web3 offers that chance because we are at the beginning of this conversation. We're at the precipice where we weren't there before. And Dawn, as you said, here is having protocol designers like you creating these kind of startups are actually thinking about responsible data economy for sovereign data from the very beginning, embedded into the actual consensus layer, and now you're saying execution layer, how we do that paradigm roll-up is so key, because that's actually going to be the beginning of people like us in this room, in this community, actually solving and addressing the things that Marissa, you're saying. And it sounds like you're a bit hopeful from this conversation that some of these things could be addressing, some systemic policies without saying that technology is the solution. So it sounds like,
I think we're at a pivotal point just in our society. If you read the book, you can see the pivot point, Reconstruction, civil rights. I think we're at another pivot point that these conversations are happening. I worry in the way that the last two turned out. So, but I am very hopeful.
Let's build this together.
Web 3 doesn't work, we can just go ahead and jump to Web 5.
Yes, Web 5 next year, 2023. And thank you so much, Aaron and Isaiah and Dawn and Marissa.